They laid Jesus there. And so the account of Good Friday ends in the Gospel of John. For us, tonight, it remains to take a look and figure out what in the world has happened. What the heck happened here? 5 days ago, we gathered together on Palm Sunday. Jesus entered Jerusalem as the king. Jesus, the King of the Jews. Psalm 118, we heard it, was on the thoughts and the hearts and the minds of the people who welcomed Jesus into the city. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna, the King of David, and all of that. One would have thought that by Friday, some of that kingship would be on display. Psalm 110 is a great psalm of kingship. Psalm 110, David writes, "The Lord God said to my Lord, the Messiah, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. The Lord will extend your mighty scepter from Zion, saying, rule in the midst of your enemies." That's what we would have expected last Sunday. But instead of Psalm 110, with its triumph, with its victory, it wasn't Psalm 110 on Good Friday. On Friday, it was all the way down in the depths, Psalm 22. Just a somber, sad, pleading with God for help. Let's read it responsively together. Do not be far from me, for trouble is near, and there is no one to help. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me? So far from my cries of anguish. My God, I cry out by day, but you do not answer. By night, and I find no rest. Do not be far from me, for trouble is near, and there is no one to help. Yet you are enthroned as the Holy One. You are the one Israel praises. In you our ancestors put their trust. They trusted and you delivered them. To you they cried out and were saved. In you they trusted and were not put to shame. Do not be far from me, for trouble is near, and there is no one to help. But I am a worm and not a man, scorned by everyone, despised by the people. All who see me mock me. They hurl insults, shaking their heads. He trusts in the Lord, they say. Let the Lord rescue him. Let him deliver him, since he delights in him. Do not be far from me, for trouble is near, and there is no one to help. Yet you brought me out of the womb. You made me trust in you, even at my mother's breast. From birth I was cast on you. From my mother's womb you have been my God. Do not be far from me, for trouble is near, and there is no one to help. I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart has turned to wax. It has melted within me. My mouth is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth. You lay me in the dust of death. Do not be far from me, for trouble is near, and there is no one to help. Dogs surround me. A pack of villains encircles me. They pierce my hands and my feet. All my bones are on display. People stare and gloat over me. They divide my clothes among them and cast lots for my garment. Do not be far from me, for trouble is near, and there is no one to help. That's what's going on, Psalm 22 tonight. Why Psalm 22? Why not Psalm 110, victory, kingship? This past Sunday, Palm Sunday, we spent a lot of time talking about the Passover, talking about how the Israelites were enslaved in Egypt for 400 years, how God sent Moses to deliver them from Egypt, to free his people, and God sent the 10 plagues to change the Pharaoh's mind, and the 10th plague, the worst of all, the killing of the firstborn in every home in Egypt, and how the people could escape that plague by sacrificing a lamb, by placing the blood of the lamb on the doorpost of the home, so that when the angel of death comes, the angel of death would pass over that home and everyone inside would be spared. A lamb sacrificed to protect the firstborn in the home. Last night we were here again talking about sacrifice, a great covenant sacrifice at the foot of Mount Sinai after the Israelites came out of Egypt, crossed the Red Sea, and came to Mount Sinai in the desert. A sacrifice which began a covenant, an agreement between God and his people. This week, all week, we're talking about sacrifice. Palm Sunday, Monday, Thursday, Good Friday, and even into Easter Sunday. We're talking about sacrifice this week because it's something that's foreign to our culture, these kind of sacrifices, but they're not foreign at all to the way God works with people, even with us today. That's why we need to know about sacrifice. Sacrifice, sacrifice, sacrifice. Throughout history, that's just how God works. One gives up his life, is sacrificed, so another could live. You've probably heard of the word scapegoat. A scapegoat is someone who's blamed for the sins of someone else. Someone who takes the penalty, the punishment, whatever it is, who gets punished for the sins that someone else committed. That's a scapegoat. It's a sacrifice, in essence. One paying the price for what someone else did. Scapegoats, too, have their origin in the command of God in Leviticus chapter 16. Then he, Aaron, the high priest, is to take 2 goats and present them before the Lord at the entrance to the tent of meeting. He is to cast lots for the 2 goats, one lot for the Lord, the other for the scapegoat. Aaron shall bring the goat whose lot falls to the Lord and sacrifice it for a sin offering. But the goat chosen by Lot as the scapegoat shall be presented alive before the Lord, to be used for making atonement by sending the scapegoat, sending into the wilderness as a scapegoat. He is to lay both hands on the head of the live goat and confess over it all the wickedness and rebellion of the Israelites, all their sins, put them on the goat's head. And he shall send the goat away into the wilderness in the care of someone appointed for the task. The goat will carry on itself all the people's sins to a remote place, and the man shall release it in the wilderness. Of course, the scapegoat would eventually die. It's another story of sacrifice. Another story of sacrifice, 4,000 years ago from today, so 2,000 years before Jesus. 4,000 years ago, a man was told by God to sacrifice his teenage son, his only son, the son whom he loved. He was told to go to a particular mountain, and why this particular mountain will become evident momentarily. He was told to go to a particular mountain, and on this mountain to build an altar out of stone and to sacrifice his son on the altar. Believe it or not, that was not a strange thing in that culture. In that culture, people often sacrifice their children to gods. It's horrible. So the man woke up early in the morning and took his son and loaded his donkey with provisions for a 3-day journey because it was 3 days away. The mountain they were going to was in the wilderness, at the edge of the wilderness. They didn't have wood for an offering there, and so the man cut up wood and loaded the wood on the back of his son. Imagine the son carrying the wood for his sacrifice. And unknown to the son, the sacrifice was he himself, was going to be sacrificed. And along the way, the son questioned the father about this. We don't have any animals. Where's the lamb for the sacrifice? The son asked. And the father said, the Lord will provide. And so they got to the mountain. And the father and the son built the altar out of stone and laid the wood on the altar. And then the father bound his son and laid his son on top of the wood. Imagine the boy's fear. The father drew a knife to slay his son, his only son, the son he loved. And just as he was about to plunge the knife in, God called out to him, "Stop!" And the man looked up, and there in the thicket, behold, there was a ram caught in the thicket and its horns. And he went over and he took the ram, and he sacrificed the ram as a burnt offering in place of his son. And the man called that place, "The Lord will provide." And it said, even to this day, on the mountain of the Lord, it will be provided. So from that account of that sacrifice, we learn a couple of things, at least 2 things, more than 2, but here's 2. First, sacrificing children is absolutely forbidden to God's people. Many other cultures have sacrificed children, but never sacrificed to God, never. And second, it's God alone who can provide the sacrifice. In fact, that's how God works. Not just sometimes, but that's how God works all the time. On the one hand, the scripture's clear. The soul that sins will die. That's us. On the other hand, even with this ram caught in a thicket 4,000 years ago, we see that God spares his children and provides a sacrifice to be sacrificed, to give his life in the place of his children. 4,000 years, God hasn't changed. It's believed by Jews and Christians that this is the rock where that sacrifice of the ram took place 4,000 years ago, where that ram gave its life so that the son could live. The mountain is named Mount Moriah. And when you go to this place today, you can see the place where it was said the Lord will provide. But God's provision cost something. Not just something, it cost everything. For that ram, the ram gave its very life on that altar to save the boy from death. The whole sacrificial system of the Old Testament, the sacrifice of the ram, the sacrifice of Passover, all the sacrifices in Leviticus, all of that point to a key principle of how God works in the world among us. One person faces death. One person deserves to die, and the sacrifice is made, and that person goes free. That's how God works. All of those sacrifices throughout all the Old Testament all point to the one sacrifice, the sacrifice of the one, once and for all. One man giving his life so that you and I could be free. That's what they point to. The prophet Isaiah saw how God worked time and time again through those sacrifices and saw into the future how God was going to send a person to be sacrificed for all of us. And Isaiah writes this in his prophecy about this one man. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering. Yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. We all like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearers is silent, he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. And yet who of his generation protested? For he was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgression of my people he was punished. He was assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death. Though he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. And yet it was the Lord's will to crush him and cause him to suffer. 700 years before Jesus, that was the prophecy. Isaiah was prophesying about the one to come, the very Son of God, God's own Son, God's only Son, the one whom God loved. The one who would come and like that teenage boy thousands of years before, would carry the wood out to the place of sacrifice. You can see the picture. Who would, on the way out, look around for somebody else. Would have called out the night before in the Garden of Gethsemane, Father, if it could be possible, let this cup pass from me. Let somebody else do this. Let somebody else be sacrificed. But this time there was no ram in the thicket. The Son was going to be sacrificed, God's Son. There was no substitute for this man, Jesus, because he was the one who was the substitute for all of us. He was the sacrifice for you. You were the one who was supposed to be carrying that cross. You were the one destined to die. But God worked it out that you and I would not have to die, but that his Son, his only Son, the one he loved, would die in our place. And not only in your place, but the day Jesus died, there was one man in particular in whose place Jesus died. A man whose story I think many of us don't even know. We forget. Even though this man is mentioned in all four Gospels, Jesus died in place of this man in particular. As the story unfolds, Jesus is on trial before Pontius Pilate. All four of the accounts Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John mention this guy, and yet we seldom talk about it. Here's what happens. It was the custom at the festival to release a prisoner whom the people requested. A man called Barabbas was in prison with the insurrectionists who had committed murder in the uprising. The crowd came up and asked Pilate to do for them what he usually did. Do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews? Jesus, in other words, Pilate asked, knowing it was out of self-interest that the chief priests had handed Jesus over to him. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have Pilate release Barabbas instead. What shall I do then with the one you call the king of the Jews? Pilate asked. Crucify him, they shouted. Why? What crime has he committed? Asked Pilate. But they shouted all the louder, crucify him! Wanting to satisfy the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas to them, and he had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. Barabbas was on death row. Barabbas was just like that boy we talked about earlier, the one who carried the wood out to the altar for sacrifice, who went along with his father to Mount Moriah. That was Barabbas. Barabbas' death was imminent. But then along came Jesus, and much like the ram in the thicket showed up years before. And one thing led to another, and Barabbas was set free, and Jesus died in Barabbas' place. The wickedness of Barabbas was laid on the head of Jesus, like that wickedness of the people was laid on the head of the scapegoat. Jesus was the ultimate scapegoat, and he was not led out into the wilderness, but he was led outside the walls to die for Barabbas, in the place of Barabbas, outside the walls of Jerusalem. As God would have it, where Jesus died is less than 2,000 feet away from that rock where that ram died in that young boy's place. God knows how to write a script. God knows how to end a story really well. Jesus pays the ultimate price for Barabbas to free him and to free you and me as well. But there's more. God's perfect ending has another little perfection for us. Barabbas, his name means son of the Father. How ironic is that? Barabbas, whose name means son of the Father, was set free, and the son of the Father died in his place. The son of the Father was sacrificed so that the son of the Father could live. The son of the Father was sacrificed so that all of you Barabbases, all of you sons and daughters of the Father, might live. Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the whole world, the Messiah, God's Son, became the ultimate sacrifice. So that all the sacrifices that had taken place for all those thousands of years would find their ultimate fulfillment in Jesus. So that there'd be no more sacrifices for sin. That's why we don't have them today. Because Jesus was the once and for all sacrifice for you and me. So that you, by trusting in that sacrifice in your place, would live forever. And so that you might live not for yourselves, but rather live for him who died for you. So that you might be a living sacrifice. Each and every day living a sacrificial life in thanksgiving to the one who gave his life for you. Might live as a true son of the Father, might live as a true daughter of the Father, so that you might be a true Barabbas,